The Nile River flows north through the desert, a ribbon of life cutting through one of Earth's harshest landscapes. Without the Nile, Egypt would be nothing but barren sand. With it, Egypt became one of history's greatest civilizations, a culture that built monuments still standing 4,500 years later, developed writing and mathematics, created art of breathtaking beauty, and established a state that endured for 3 millennia. This is the story of how ancient Egypt rose from scattered farming villages to become a superpower that shaped the ancient world and continues to captivate us today. Around 10,000 BCE, the Sahara wasn't a desert. It was savanna, grasslands with rivers and lakes where hunter-gatherers lived, following game and gathering wild plants. But climate change gradually dried the region. By 5000 BCE, the desert was expanding. People clustered along the Nile, the only reliable water source remaining. This environmental catastrophe forced innovation. Necessity mothered Egyptian civilization. The Nile made Egypt possible but demanded understanding. Every summer, heavy rains in the Ethiopian highlands sent water surging down the Nile. The river flooded Egypt's narrow valley, depositing nutrient-rich silt that fertilized the soil. When the waters receded in autumn, farmers planted in the moist, enriched earth. Without the flood, crops failed and people starved. With it, Egypt's harvests were abundant. But the flood was unpredictable. Too little water meant drought. Too much meant destruction. Success required understanding the river's patterns, organizing large-scale irrigation works, storing surplus food, and coordinating labor. These needs pushed Egyptians toward cooperation, organization, and eventually, centralized authority. By 4000 BCE, farming villages dotted the Nile Valley. They grew wheat and barley, raised cattle and sheep, and made pottery and tools. These villages gradually merged into larger communities with local leaders. Egypt was divided into dozens of small kingdoms, each controlling a stretch of river. Warfare was constant as these kingdoms fought for resources and territory. Slowly, stronger kingdoms absorbed weaker ones. By 3500 BCE, Egypt had consolidated into two kingdoms: Lower Egypt in the marshy Nile Delta in the north, and Upper Egypt in the river valley to the south. These kingdoms developed distinct cultures, gods, and crowns, but they also traded, fought, and influenced each other. Unification was inevitable. Around 3100 BCE, a king from Upper Egypt named Narmer conquered Lower Egypt, unifying the country for the first time. The Narmer Palette, a ceremonial stone carving discovered in 1898, depicts this conquest, Narmer wearing both the white crown of Upper Egypt and the red crown of Lower Egypt, smiting his enemies. Whether Narmer's unification was violent conquest or political alliance remains debated, but the result was clear. Egypt became the world's first nation-state. Narmer established his capital at Memphis, strategically located where the valley meets the delta. Memphis would remain Egypt's political and cultural center for centuries. Unification brought unprecedented stability and prosperity. A single government controlled the entire Nile, coordinating flood management, irrigation, and food storage. Trade networks expanded. Art and architecture flourished. Writing developed. Egyptian hieroglyphics emerged around 3200 BCE, possibly influenced by contact with Mesopotamian writing. But whereas Mesopotamian cuneiform was pressed into clay tablets for accounting, Egyptian hieroglyphs were carved into stone to commemorate kings and gods. The Egyptians developed hieratic script, a cursive form for daily use on papyrus, paper made from Nile reeds. Writing enabled bureaucracy, record-keeping, literature, and historical memory. The early dynastic period, 3100 to 686 BCE, saw Egypt's fundamental institutions develop. The pharaoh was not just a king but a living god, Horus incarnate. He owned all land, commanded all labor, and mediated between humanity and the gods. This divine kingship legitimized absolute authority and enabled massive state projects. An elaborate bureaucracy of scribes, officials, and priests administered the kingdom. collecting taxes, organizing labor, and maintaining order. The Old Kingdom, 2686 to 181 BCE, marked Egypt's first golden age, the Pyramid Age. Pharaohs commanded unprecedented resources and wielded unquestioned authority. They expressed their power and secured their afterlife through increasingly massive tombs. King Djoser, third pharaoh of the Third Dynasty, commissioned his architect Imhotep to design something revolutionary. Instead of a traditional mud brick tomb, Imhotep built the step pyramid at Saqqara around 2630 BCE, 6 stone platforms stacked atop each other, rising 200 feet. It was the world's first large stone building, a technological and artistic breakthrough. Imhotep became the only commoner ever deified by the Egyptians, worshipped as a god of wisdom and medicine. But the step pyramid was just the beginning. Pharaoh Sneferu of the Fourth Dynasty built 3 pyramids, experimenting with angles and construction techniques. His son Khufu built the greatest pyramid of all, the Great Pyramid of Giza, around 2560 BCE. The Great Pyramid is staggering. It contains 2.3 million stone blocks, each averaging 2.5 tons, some weighing 15 tons. It originally stood 481 feet tall, the world's tallest structure for 3,800 years. The base covers 13 acres, level to within inches. The sides align almost perfectly with the cardinal directions. Constructing it required quarrying, transporting, and precisely placing millions of tons of stone with copper tools, wooden sledges, and human muscle. How was it built? The exact methods remain debated, but recent evidence suggests a combination of internal and external ramps, lubricated sledges on wet sand, and tens of thousands of workers organized into teams during the flood season when farming was impossible. These weren't slaves but paid laborers, fed and housed by the state. Workers' villages, bakeries, and breweries have been excavated near the pyramids. The pyramids were jobs programs as much as tombs, demonstrating pharaonic power while employing Egypt's population. Khufu's successors, his son Khafre and grandson Menkaure, built their own pyramids at Giza, slightly smaller but equally impressive. Khafre added the Great Sphinx, a massive limestone sculpture with a lion's body and human head, possibly Khafre's portrait, guarding the pyramid complex. These monuments weren't built in isolation. They were parts of vast complexes including temples, causeways, and smaller pyramids for queens. The Giza Plateau was a vast necropolis, a city of the dead. The pyramids required more than labor and stone. They demanded sophisticated mathematics, engineering, and organization. Egyptians developed geometry to calculate angles and areas. They used surveying tools to ensure precision. They coordinated supply chains, bringing materials from distant quarries. They managed food, water, and housing for thousands of workers. The pyramids were ultimate expressions of state power, the ability to mobilize society's resources toward a single goal. But pyramids served religious purposes too. Egyptians believed in an afterlife where the dead lived eternally if properly prepared. The body was preserved through mummification. Possessions were buried with the deceased. Prayers and offerings sustained them. For pharaohs, who became gods after death, elaborate tombs ensured their eternal existence and continued protection of Egypt. The pyramid shape had religious significance. It resembled the primordial mound where creation began. The pyramid's sides represented rays of sunlight, allowing the pharaoh's soul to ascend to the sun god Ra. Inside, passages led to burial chambers containing the sarcophagus. Walls were covered with hieroglyphic texts, the pyramid texts, containing spells and prayers to guide the pharaoh through the afterlife. Old Kingdom Egypt was hierarchical and stable. The pharaoh stood atop the social pyramid, followed by nobles, priests, scribes, craftsmen, farmers, and servants. Most Egyptians were farmers, living in mud brick villages, working the fields during growing season and laboring on state projects during floods. Life was hard but predictable. The government maintained granaries for famines. Mad, The principle of truth, justice, and cosmic order governed society. Everyone had a place and duty. Egyptian religion was complex and evolving. Hundreds of gods existed, many associated with specific cities or natural forces. Ra, the sun god, was supreme, traveling across the sky daily and through the underworld at night. Osiris ruled the dead and judged souls. Isis was the ideal mother and wife, embodying magic and protection. Horus, the falcon god, represented kingship. Every pharaoh was Horus incarnate. These gods weren't abstract concepts but personalities with myths, temples, and priests. Temples were homes for gods, not places of public worship. Massive stone structures enclosed sacred precincts where priests performed daily rituals, waking the god's statue, washing, clothing, and feeding it. These rituals maintained cosmic order. Only priests accessed the inner sanctum. Common people worshipped at home shrines or during festivals when gods' statues were paraded through towns. Egyptian art developed distinctive conventions that remained remarkably consistent for 3,000 years. Human figures were shown with heads in profile but eyes frontal, torsos frontal but legs in profile, showing each body part from its most recognizable angle. Scale indicated importance. Pharaohs towered over subjects. Colors had symbolic meanings: gold for gods, green for rebirth, red for chaos. Art wasn't about realism but conveying eternal truths. But the Old Kingdom couldn't last forever. Pyramid building exhausted resources. Provincial nobles gained power, challenging royal authority. Climate change brought lower Nile floods and crop failures. Around 2181 BCE, centralized authority collapsed. Egypt fragmented into competing kingdoms. The first intermediate period, 2180–1055 BCE, was chaos, civil war, famine, social upheaval. Literature from this era laments the world turned upside down, where the poor became rich and the rich poor, where tombs were robbed and order dissolved. Yet even in collapse, Egyptian resilience shone. Local rulers maintained order in their regions. Art and literature continued. Eventually, a dynasty from Thebes in southern Egypt reunified the country around 2055 BCE, beginning the Middle Kingdom. The Middle Kingdom, 2055–1650 BCE, was Egypt's classical age. Pharaohs learned from the Old Kingdom's collapse. They ruled more pragmatically, emphasizing justice and care for all Egyptians, not just divine majesty. Literature from this period, like The Tale of Sinu and The Eloquent Peasant, emphasized wisdom, loyalty, and proper conduct. These texts were copied and studied for centuries, shaping Egyptian values. Middle Kingdom pharaohs built pyramids but smaller ones, focusing resources on irrigation, fortifications, and economic development. They expanded trade networks into Nubia for gold, into the Levant for cedar and luxury goods, and across the Red Sea to Punt for incense and exotic animals. Egypt grew wealthy through commerce. The Middle Kingdom also saw Egyptian culture spread and mature. Art became more naturalistic and personal. Statues showed pharaohs looking careworn, burdened by responsibility, rather than idealized and youthful. Literature flourished. Mathematics and medicine advanced. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, a medical text from this period, describes 48 surgical cases with observations and treatments remarkably rational, avoiding magical explanations. But the Middle Kingdom also weakened gradually. Provincial nobles gained autonomy. A succession of weak pharaohs couldn't maintain control. Then came an unprecedented crisis: foreign invasion. Around 1650 BCE, people called the Hyksos, rulers of foreign lands, probably from the Levant, seized control of the Nile Delta. They brought new military technology: horse-drawn chariots, composite bows, and bronze weapons. Egyptian forces, still using traditional weapons and tactics, couldn't stop them. The Hyksos established their capital at Avaris in the Delta and ruled northern Egypt. The Second Intermediate Period, 1651–550 BCE, saw Egypt divided. Hyksos kings controlled the north. Egyptian pharaohs ruled from Thebes in the south. Nubian kingdoms threatened from the south. For nearly a century, Egypt endured foreign domination, a humiliation never forgotten. But defeat taught valuable lessons. Egyptians adopted Hyksos military technology, building chariot forces and learning new tactics. The Theban dynasty built strength and waited. Around 1550 BCE, Pharaoh Ahmose launched a war of liberation. His armies drove the Hyksos from Egypt, pursuing them into Canaan. Egypt was reunified, and the experience transformed Egyptian foreign policy forever. The New Kingdom, 1551–077 BCE, marked Egypt's imperial age. Never again would Egypt passively await invasion. Instead, Egypt would dominate its neighbors through military might. The New Kingdom pharaohs were warrior kings, personally leading armies, expanding Egypt's borders further than ever before. Ahmose established the 18th dynasty and began this transformation. His successors continued it. Thutmose I campaigned in Nubia and Syria. Thutmose III, Egypt's greatest military commander, led 17 campaigns over 20 years, conquering from Nubia to the Euphrates River. At the Battle of Megiddo in 1457 BCE, Thutmose defeated a coalition of Canaanite kings, establishing Egyptian dominance in the Levant. His military innovations, surprise attacks, detailed planning, logistical organization, made him antiquity's first great strategic genius. Egyptian imperialism brought immense wealth. Tribute from conquered territories, gold from Nubian mines, trade goods from across the Near East, all flowed into Egypt. The New Kingdom was Egypt's wealthiest period. Pharaohs used this wealth to build temples of unprecedented scale and splendor. But the New Kingdom's most fascinating figure wasn't a warrior. Queen Hatshepsut, who ruled as pharaoh around 1479 for 58 BCE, emphasized trade and construction over conquest. As a woman ruling in a male role, she faced legitimacy challenges. She portrayed herself with a ceremonial beard and male titles, claiming divine right to rule. Her magnificent mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari, carved into cliffs, ranks among Egypt's architectural masterpieces. She sent a famous trade expedition to Punt, bringing back myrrh trees, incense, and exotic goods. Her reign was prosperous and peaceful, though later pharaohs tried to erase her from history. The New Kingdom reached its zenith under Amenhotep III, 1391–352 BCE, whose long, peaceful reign saw Egypt at the height of wealth and power. He built extensively, including additions to the Karnak temple complex in Thebes and his own massive mortuary temple, guarded by the colossi of Memnon, two giant statues that still stand today. Then came revolution. Amenhotep III's son, who became Amenhotep IV, launched history's first known monotheistic revolution. Around 1353 BCE, he changed his name to Akhenaten, effective for the Aten, and declared that only one god existed, Aten, the sun disk. He closed traditional temples, banned the old gods, and moved the capital to a new city, Amarna, dedicated to Aten. He developed a new art style showing elongated bodies and naturalistic scenes of royal family life. Akhenaten's revolution was radical and deeply unpopular. Priests lost power and wealth. People were forbidden to worship gods their families had honored for millennia. Foreign policy suffered as Akhenaten focused on religious reform. After his death around 1336 BCE, the revolution collapsed. His successor, the boy king Tutankhamun, restored the old gods and moved the capital back to Thebes. Akhenaten was denounced as a heretic, his city abandoned, his monuments destroyed. Tutankhamun himself was insignificant historically, dying around age 19 after a brief reign. But his tomb's discovery in 1922 by Howard Carter made him history's most famous pharaoh. Unlike other royal tombs, Tutankhamun's had never been robbed. It contained over 5,000 objects, golden coffins, jewelry, furniture, chariots, weapons, even food. The golden funerary mask is Egyptian art's most iconic image. The discovery revealed the spectacular wealth of New Kingdom royalty. The 19th dynasty saw Egypt's power peak militarily under Ramesses II, 1279–13 BCE, who ruled 66 years. He fought the Hittite Empire of Anatolia for control of Syria. The Battle of Kadesh in 1274 BCE, involving perhaps 5,000 chariots and 50,000 soldiers, was ancient history's largest chariot battle. Both sides claimed victory, but the battle was essentially a draw. It led to history's first recorded peace treaty, establishing a border and alliance between Egypt and the Hittites. The treaty text survives in both Egyptian hieroglyphs and Hittite cuneiform. Ramesses II was also history's most prolific builder. He constructed more monuments, temples, and statues than any other pharaoh. The temple complex at Abu Simbel, with 4 colossal statues of Ramesses carved from a cliff face, each 65 feet tall, remains breathtaking. The Ramesseum, his mortuary temple, was massive. He added to nearly every major temple in Egypt. He wanted to be remembered forever, and succeeded. But after Ramesses II, decline began. His successors faced new threats. Around 1200 BCE, the Bronze Age world collapsed. Mysterious sea peoples attacked the eastern Mediterranean, destroying civilizations from Greece to the Levant. The Hittite Empire fell. Syrian cities burned. The sea peoples attacked Egypt multiple times. Ramesses III defeated them around 1178 BCE in battles carved on his temple at Medinet Habu, but the effort exhausted Egypt. The new kingdom slowly weakened. Theban priests of Amun gained enormous power, eventually rivaling pharaohs. Libya's tribes infiltrated the delta. Nubia broke free. Around 1077 BCE, Egypt again split. Priests controlled the south, weak pharaohs the north. The third intermediate period began, and Egypt's age of greatness ended. Later periods saw foreign domination. Libyans, Nubians, Assyrians, and Persians all ruled Egypt. When Alexander the Great conquered Egypt in 332 BCE, Egyptians welcomed him as a liberator from Persian rule. After Alexander's death, his general Ptolemy established a Greek dynasty ruling from Alexandria. The Ptolemies adopted pharaonic traditions, building temples in Egyptian style while promoting Greek culture. Cleopatra VII, the last Ptolemaic ruler, was actually Greek, though she learned Egyptian, rare among her dynasty. Cleopatra's defeat by Rome in 30 BCE ended independent Egypt. Egypt became a Roman province, its grain feeding Rome, its wealth filling Roman treasuries. Yet Egyptian culture persisted. Temples functioned until the 4th century CE, when Christianity displaced the old gods. Hieroglyphs were last written around 394 CE. The knowledge of reading them was lost for over 1,400 years, until Jean-François Champollion deciphered the Rosetta Stone in 1822. What made Egyptian civilization so remarkable? Continuity. For 3,000 years, Egypt maintained cultural identity. The hieroglyphs written in 3000 BCE could be read in 30 BCE. Artistic conventions remained consistent. Gods stayed the same. This stability was unprecedented and never repeated. While empires rose and fell around them, Egyptians endured. Geography explains much. Desert protected Egypt from invasion for millennia. The Nile provided reliable resources, but geography alone doesn't explain Egyptian achievement. Their accomplishments required organization, innovation, and vision. They developed mathematics to build pyramids, engineering to control the Nile, medicine to preserve bodies, writing to record knowledge. They created art of timeless beauty and architecture that endures after 4,500 years. Egyptian civilization influenced all who encountered it. Greeks admired Egyptian wisdom. Romans copied Egyptian obelisks. Early Christians developed monasticism partly from Egyptian hermit traditions. Islamic scholars studied Egyptian mathematics and astronomy. The Renaissance rediscovered Egypt through Roman copies. Napoleon's Egyptian campaign sparked Egyptology. Today, Egypt remains endlessly fascinating. Pyramids, mummies, pharaohs, and hieroglyphs captivate popular imagination. From the first farmers on the Nile's banks to Cleopatra's defeat, Egyptian civilization spanned 3 millennia. They built monuments that still stand, wrote texts we still read, and created art we still admire. They understood that while individual lives are brief, civilization can endure. They built for eternity and in many ways achieved it. The Nile still flows north through the desert. The pyramids still stand at Giza. The temples still rise at Karnak and Luxor. Ancient Egypt is gone, but its legacy endures, reminding us that human achievement can transcend time itself.